What happened to us was prophesied long ago. Various prophecies in Scripture was a warning to our ancestors that they would be taken into captivity because of their continued disobedience. These prophecies provide insights into the oppressive history faced by the descendants of Negroes and its significance in shaping their cultural identity. We are continuing the discussion about the colonizers' game plan to erase our history and replace us. As discussed in the last session, their deception is crumbling. The ploy is actually unveiling Bible prophecy and revealing our true identity. In this session, we're going to share additional historical records and diaspora patterns to show that what happened to us is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Now let's pick up where we left off last time. We talked about Portugal and how many of our ancestors were forced to convert to Christianity. They were identified as Portuguese because it was a legal status. Also, after they converted, they were called New Christians, and many of them were shipped directly to the Americas, bypassing West Africa. After 1497, all Yehudis or Jews in Portugal were forcibly converted. Many were later accused of Judaizing and then enslaved. These enslaved Israelite families were sent directly to Brazil, the Caribbean, Mexico, Peru, and Colombia. Let's look at some direct quotes that confirm the information we've been covering. Barbeau wrote about merchants and traders on the Isle of the Gulf of Guinea, and he said that a portion of them were formerly of the Hebrew nation who fled Portugal and adopted the local manner while continuing commerce with European ships. This quote comes from a translated copy of Cavazzi's work. He said, among the Portuguese along the coastal trade routes, there are those whose lineage is of the Judaic nation. He says they were seeking refuge from the tribunals in Europe and they intermarried with the local peoples. This is a quote from Ogilvy. It's paraphrased from historical compendium references. He said, in Guinea as well as in other parts of Africa, the merchants are often Portuguese of the Hebrew nation, who, while outwardly appearing Christian, maintain commerce through subtlety and established connections with native rulers. This is another one from Ogilvy. He said this in the 1670s, that many Jews expelled from Spain and Portugal find livelihood along African coasts. They engage in trade principally in gold and slaves, taking service in various European forts along the west coast. Now we need to add some context to the statements regarding slave trafficking because it's a point we can't overlook. We know that Europeans had help. No doubt there were middlemen made up of Hamites, Arabs, and other Hebrews. We certainly know that Esau's seed would have had a hand in that. But we need to make sure we understand what was going on. So let's look at this article by Dr. Debay Tadisi. He has a PhD in African Studies. This article is entitled Africans Sold Africans, Myth or Reality. The article says, the establishment of the transatlantic slave trade in the 16th century fundamentally altered the scale and nature of enslavement in Africa. European powers, particularly Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands, created an unprecedented demand for labor to sustain plantation economies in the Americas. However, European traders rarely penetrated deep into the African interior. Instead, they relied on Arab merchants' coastal trading posts. I'll drop down. It says African leaders who participated in the trade often did so under intense pressure from the Arabs, who were already on the ground. Refusal to engage could result in violent reprisals, economic isolation, or internal overthrow. In many cases, communities were forced to choose between survival and resistance. So, this context, it says, challenges the notion of voluntary or equal participation and underscores the coercive framework within which African involvement occurred. It goes on to say that the narrative that Africans willingly sold their own people ignores widespread resistance to slavery across the continent. Many African communities actively resisted raiding and enslavement through migration, fortified settlements, and armed defense. Leaders and intellectuals condemned the trade, while enslaved Africans themselves resisted through rebellion, sabotage, and escape. Now, of course, there were those who were motivated by greed and hate. But the bottom line is the day of reckoning is near, and the Most High kept a record. For those who were involved, the question they will have to answer is, how did they try to atone for their actions? Did they try to make the wrong right? That's the question. Let's look at excerpts from this book called Homelands and Diasporas: Perspectives on Jewish Culture in the Mediterranean and Beyond. And we're going to see that those folks knew that our people were on the west coast of Africa, and they covered it up. Why? Well, they had already presented another people as the people, and the color thing was a problem that they could not explain away. So this comes from academia.edu. The author of the book is Georgia Foscarini, and I'm going to read it as is. It says, there are then numerous references after the 17th century to Black Jews in various places in West Africa. One of these communities, while being little known or not at all known today, even by specialists in the field of African Judaic studies, was to exercise a profound fascination on Western thinkers and travelers for hundreds of years. This strangely unremarked group was influential not so much for what we know about it, because in truth we know little about it, but for what it represented for Western thinkers for a very considerable time, and what it continued to signify in Europe until present times. There is evidence that there were Black Jews along the coast of what is today the Republic of Congo, perhaps of Iberian origin, concentrated on the Velai kingdom of Loango, between the equator and the mouth of the Congo. The kingdom of Loango was a powerful, trading, centralized, pre-colonial African state, which survived until the 19th century. The kingdom of Loango had a number of well-constructed towns, including the important walled trading town of Loango itself. The Ma Loango, Loango's ruler, played the competing trading nations, especially the Portuguese and Dutch, against each other, and Valai middlemen operated as brokers between local traders and European ship captains. This led to great fortunes being made, much of which was in the hands of African nobles. I would say the great fortunes would definitely be in the hand of the Europeans, so I disagree with that statement. It goes on to say that as we have seen, there was a sense in medieval Europe that the interior of Africa was peopled in part by Jews in the form of the lost tribes of Israel, and this was particularly the case in the West African hinterland. It appears, however, that a specific connection had also existed for many centuries between the Luango coastline and Jews. Some 15th century European maps designated the coast near Luango the Gulf of the Yehudis, or the Gulf of the Jews. I'll drop down. It says the first reference to a black Jewish community in Luango is much later and comes from the pen of Christian George Andreas Oldendorp, the evangelical German theologian who in 1767 was sent to the Danish colonial possessions in the West Indies to write a report on the results of the mission of the Moravian Brethren in the islands. He worked hard and meticulously and produced a lengthy manuscript, only a third of which was initially published. The resulting work was published in 1777. In his book, he gave a good deal of detailed and credible information about Africa based on the testimony of the slaves he interviewed. His was the first written account, for instance, of the Igbo people. Among other things, he mentioned the existence of a black Jewish community in Luango. According to him, Jews had been expelled from Sao Tome, and it was from these banished Jews that the black Portuguese and the black Jews of Luango, who were despised even by the local black population, were descended. So Oldendorp's information gave further detail. He said that the Jews were despised by the Negroes and that the Negroes would not eat with them. Now let's remember that John Ogilvy's work came out much earlier, and he identified 3 migrations of Israelites coming into that area. But this German theologian is calling the Africans who were in the region Negroes. Now let's continue, and then we're going to take a look at the Igbo people that he mentioned. It goes on to say, of course, the fact that these Jews did not eat with the local population is open to other interpretations than the refusal of the Negroes to eat with them. Open to interpretation? Yeah, I would say it's because he assumed that the natives were Negroes. But it references other cartographers identified Israelite groups being in that region 3 centuries earlier. Now listen to what happened after he published his work. It says, after Oldendorp's revelation, the Jewish community did not exactly explode with joy at the discovery of a new branch of the people of Israel. Let's understand that he's talking about the Ish folk who had already been presented to the world as the people. He's saying that when it was made known that he found Israelites in West Africa, those folks were not thrilled to hear that there was a new branch of the people of Israel in that area. No, because prevailing thought said that the chosen people had to be white. It goes on to say, no Jew to my knowledge went to discover the inner secrets of this remote community 100 years after Oldendorp's book during the 1873 German expedition to the Luongo coast. Adolf Bastian, the polymath, best known for his contributions to the development of ethnography and a member of the expedition, seems to have considered that there was indeed some connection between the ancient rumors of a Jewish population on the Luongo coast and Oldendorp's community. He noted that in the land of the Brahmas on the Luongo coast was to be found the place referred to by earlier geographers as the Gulf of Judeos. This is where, as he put it, the villages of the Mavambu, or so-called Judeos, were still to be found in his day. So had a Jewish community persisted for some 300 years without any description of it reaching the Jewish world, and without any known communication between the community and Jews elsewhere? It says, after Bastian's visit to the Luongo coast, although the community was frequently mentioned by 19th and early 20th century scholars, no one else, it says, not to my knowledge, went to visit the community, and its later fate is unrecorded. Further north in Senegal and elsewhere, the ancient Jewish communities seem to have disappeared almost without a trace. So what happened to them? More than likely, slave catchers were sent into those areas or other factions to destroy those communities. Now let's circle back to that statement where the author referenced the Igbo people. He said they were among those Oldendorp interviewed in the 1700s. And I've shared this memo from Henry Kissinger to Richard Nixon about the identity of the Igbos many times. This was written in 1969, and the memo is in the U.S. Department of State archives. The link is here for those who want to look it up. But it proves that the United States knew who we were. In this memo, Kissinger is giving Nixon an update on the Biafra relief. He wrote that a British colonel was overseeing the progress, and then he mentions the Igbos, telling Nixon that they were a people convinced that defeat meant extinction. What else did he say? He said the Igbos are the wandering Jews of West Africa. They are gifted, aggressive, westernized, at best envied and resented, but mostly despised by the mass of their neighbors in the Federation. Let's not miss the fact that this information was given to Nixon, who was president at the time. During the height of the transatlantic slave trade, Igbo people were among the most frequently enslaved. Many of you may have heard about Igbo Landing. It's a historic site at Dunbar Creek on St. Simon's Island in Georgia. Some of the enslaved people on a ship called the Wanderer took control of the ship and decided to take their own lives because they refused to submit to slavery. They were Igbos. I uploaded a video about that a number of years ago after a group of us visited that site, and I'll leave a link in the description for those who have not seen that video. Family, I think it's safe to say that we have more than enough evidence telling us that these nations knew who we were and where we were. Strabo said that our people were living throughout the Mediterranean. And just so you know, Israelites were in Spain and Portugal long before 70 AD. In Romans 15, Paul talked about how he planned to visit an Israelite community in Spain. He said this in Romans 15, 23 through 24. But now, no longer having a place in these parts, and having a great desire these many years to come to you, whenever I journey to Spain, I shall come to you, for I hope to see you on my journey, and to be helped on my way there by you, if first I may enjoy your company for a while. Let's look at some quotes from other historians. This is from Abraham ibn Dawid in the 12th century. He records Jews or Yehudis arriving in Spain during the Roman Republic long before 70 AD. Also, Isidore of Seville in the 6th century. He writes that Israelites or Yehudis were present in Spain from ancient times. There is also evidence that Israelites were sent directly from Iberia to the Americas. They were not taken from West Africa. A Jesuit priest from the 17th century named Antonio Vieira said many of the new Christians accused of Judaizing were sent to Brazil as slaves. And just a reminder, a new Christian was a name for those they had forced to convert to Catholicism or Christianity. This quote comes from the Spanish Inquisition records. It says Yehudis accused of Judaizing were enslaved and shipped directly to the Americas. The new Christians are to be transported to the Indies. Historian Arnold Wittnitzer documents that Yehudi slaves arrived directly in Brazil. Another one, historian James Sweet, confirms that many enslaved people labeled Portuguese in Brazil were actually Sephardic or African Jews. Some of those called Portuguese were in fact Yehudis or their descendants. Now let's look at some direct quotes stating that Israelites were in West Africa and that it was known because they were doing business there. This comes from Al-Bukhari in his work called Book of Routes and Realms. He describes Tikkur in the Senegal region as a place of organized faith and commerce with foreign and local communities, including Jews or Yehudis. It says, while the exact wording varies by translation, the tradition summarized in modern scholarship notes Jewish and Israelite identified groups among Sahelian traders. Al-Idrisi in the 12th century mentions a river of the Jews on the West African coast. It was understood by many scholars as a stretch of the Guinea coast where Israelite traders operated. This is paraphrased from Arabic tradition. This river, called the River of the Jews, was where traders of Jewish descent exchanged gold and salt. There are others that we mentioned previously, Tariq al-Sudan and Tariq al-Fatash, in reference to the Sudanese chronicles. These two chronicles, written in the 17th century, preserved older traditions that describe origins of ruling and scholarly families in the Niger Bin. So Tariq al-Sudan speaks of Zazua al-Yaman coming from Yemen and settling in Kukaya near the Niger, bringing a book and law, interpreted by many as a reference to Israelite or Judaic tradition. Also, Tariq al-Fatash. He speaks of families in Mali and the Niger Bin who trace their origin to lands of the East and to people of the book. And this is aligning with an Israelite identity in the Sahel. Now let's look at direct quotes regarding Israelites being here in the Americas. James H. Sweet, a historian from the University of Wisconsin. He's one of the leading scholars on African identities in the Americas. His direct quote says, Some of those called Portuguese were in fact Jews or their descendants. He documents that many enslaved people labeled Portuguese in Brazil were actually Yehudis, Luso-African Jews, or mixed African Sephardic families. Brazilian historian Rees documents African groups in Bahia who practiced Old Testament customs. Here's his quote: "Some Africans in Bahia kept customs that resembled those of ancient Israel." These were not European Jews, you all. They were Israelites being identified as Africans. In 1657, Richard Ligon wrote a true and exact history of Barbados. He describes enslaved Africans in Barbados who practiced Old Testament customs and identified with Israelite traditions. This is his direct quote. "Some of the Negroes observe the law of Moses more strictly than the Christians." There is more. There are also documentation in Suriname and Guyana. Dutch colonial records describe African slaves who practiced Israelite customs. The direct quote says, "Among the Negroes are some who call themselves Jews." This is from the Dutch Suriname archives from the 17th century. James Pennington, in his work The Fugitive Blacksmith from 1849, said this: "Many of our people believe themselves descended from the tribes of Israel." The Slave Narratives says many formerly enslaved Africans describe Old Testament laws, Israelite identity. They said, "We were the people of the book," or a quote says, "My grandmother said we were from the tribes of Israel." So we're looking at oral traditions that were preserved, identifying our people as the people of the book. So these migrations happened over centuries, and we have a historical record of it. For those who may not understand why we were kicked out of our land and scattered to the four corners, it's because of our continued disobedience and rebellion. In Deuteronomy 28:45, Moses said, "All these curses shall come upon thee and pursue thee and overtake thee till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Most High Yah, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee." This is why calamity fell upon our people. What happened to us was prophesied long ago. It was a long fall to the bottom. But the good news is that we were given a promise that we would be restored. Jeremiah 30:3 says, "For behold, the days are coming, says the Most High, that I will bring back from captivity my people Israel and Judah, and I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it." Notice that he's talking about bringing back both houses, Israel and Judah. Yet those who say that they are us only identify themselves as Jews. They're identifying with one tribe. Where are the other tribes? 1948 was not a fulfillment of this prophecy. The fulfillment is yet to come. We're going to end it there and continue next time. If this message has been a blessing to you, remember to like, hype, and share. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.